Hey there, everybody. For task 1 of this lab, we're going to be inside of ArcGIS Online, and we have 4 different things we need to get through. So the first one is just going to be logging in, and this is probably the most important step. So need to make sure that your credentials work, you're able to log in, and then from there, it should be pretty straightforward, similar to the Introduction to ArcGIS Online video. Number 2, we're going to be searching for and adding data into a map. Again, this is pretty straightforward and follows the same steps that were in the Intro to ArcGIS Online video, but I'll give you some additional advice and tips and tricks in here. Number 3, we're going to be building a data set inside of ArcGIS Online. So basically creating a blank set of features, a location to store digitized data. So this is something that was not in the introduction video, but we'll cover here. And then 4, we'll be saving and then sharing that map so that others in the class and really anybody else could then view and see the map that you created. So let's get started. So the first thing you're going to need to do is just log into the ArcGIS Online organization. And so I have the URL that you can put into your browser bar right here. And after I have the logins set up for you, and we go through that this next week, it'll just bring you right to the RIT login page. So RIT, arcgis.maps.arcgis.com. That'll be the URL that you can use here and also in ArcGIS Pro. So write that one down. So now I'm just going to use my RIT credentials. So BJB, IGM, I've got my password already saved, and I'm going to hit login. And so that will bring me directly to this page. So now I'm logged in, I'm seeing the main RIT ArcGIS homepage. So from here, I just need to go up here and click Map. And as I mentioned in the first video, we're going to be using the new map viewer. So I'm going to click this button to open the new map viewer. So we've got the new map viewer loaded. And before you even get to this step, please consider what kind of research or what topic you really want to look at and dive into. So you should know a geography or a region or a location where you're going to start finding data and resources. Because in ArcGIS Online, you'll find some data here. Again, we're going to find one vector layer and one raster layer. And then in ArcGIS Pro, we're going to be searching the web and finding data related to that same geography. So I know I'm going to be working with New Orleans. And so you can pick any other place, any other topic. This is just for the demonstration. So please don't use the same data in the same location as me. There's information, there's data across the entire globe. So you can really pick anything that's an interest of yours. But it'll take a little bit of searching to find some different layers and data and think of ways you want to present it and use it. So I'm going to go here to add layer. And in the drop down, make sure that you don't select my content because you'll not really see any information or data here. So in my content, I'm going to drop down and I'm going to select Living Atlas. So now I'll be able to search across all the authoritative data that Esri has put a stamp of approval on. You could also search across ArcGIS Online, and this would be other users like yourselves that can just take information and data and share it with the public. So you have to be a little more careful with the sources or where the information is coming from here, because it could literally be anyone, but there's still some good data there. So either of these two are good options. Living Atlas, authoritative, ArcGIS Online, really could be anyone. So I'm going to start with Living Atlas. And a quick little tip, I just said I'm going to use New Orleans as my study area. So I'm going to hold the Shift key, and then I'm going to use my mouse pointer to draw over New Orleans. This can help you zoom into a selected area a little bit quicker. You could also come over here to the right-hand side and use the search tool, and that can then zoom you into a specific area on the map. And so in New Orleans, you can see the Living Atlas has already presented me with a range of different options. And there's terrain, there is a slope map, there is some imagery, elevation. So a lot of these are great examples of raster data sets, which is one of the types you're going to add in and search for and use. And if I mouse over these little icons, you can see this says an imagery layer. This one also says it's an imagery layer. So any of these ones that are in imagery layer are perfectly suitable to use for your raster information or your raster data set. The one that I want to search for is related to flood. And you can see here, I'm looking at this USA flood hazards information. And for any of these layers, and let's mouse over, make sure it's raster. So it's an imagery layer, perfect. I'm going to click this. And this will then pull up the details and the description of what this layer is. You can see here it was published by FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So I can know that it's a fairly authoritative data set. I've got a description here of what this data is and a lot more details. And look, publication date very recently, almost in the last 4 or 5 months or so. So this is fantastic. And then all I need to do is click here to add this to the map. And so this layer just got added to the map. And again, I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer into the metro area of the city. So I held Shift again and just used the mouse to drag over that area of the map. And so here, the layer loaded up, and I'm going to go back to look at my layers. So I'm going to use the back button to see everything that's been added into the map. So I just have one layer so far listed here. If I want to turn that off, I can click this little eye icon, and that'll hide a layer. So as this list grows, you can turn layers on and off. And then I have the legend or the key over here of this layer. So that dark purple is saying this is a 1% annual flood hazard chance. In these areas in here, I can see the street outlines and some of those parts of the city are the areas that are more likely to flood. I can see those lighter purple, a 0.2% annual flood chance hazard, and this kind of tan color, area of minimal flood hazard. So those are those really 3 areas I'm most interested in, showing me where the areas of the city are most likely to flood. So this is a piece of raster information, but it's more related to elevation. So there's a lot of different data sets out there that could be rainfall, elevation, imagery. And so there's a number of different options you could find and use in your map. So we finished our kind of first part of this. So I've got one raster data set added in. Now I'm going to look for a vector layer, which are points, lines, or polygons again. So I'm going to go back to the Living Atlas, and the layer that I want to add into this map is a poverty data set. And so there is a wealth of information at the national, at state, and especially in the United States. If you're looking outside of the United States, the Living Atlas will have data sets for you, but you might want to toggle and search across ArcGIS Online because there might be actually more data sets for you depending on the geographies you're looking. So definitely switch between those two. And then this next data sets have just loaded up. So let me click this ACS poverty to see what this one's all about. So I select that data set. Again, I get a nice description for what this data is. It says it's coming from the ACS, which is the American Community Survey. And these are 5-year estimates. So these are basically the Census Bureau doing population estimates and population numbers not every 10 years, but every 1, 3, or 5 years. So this is a great data set to use and to look at. And there are a lot of different variables that you can dive into. And in this case, I was really curious about the poverty data. And now I'm going to add this data to the map as well. And so we just saw our legend load up, and the layer is going to draw on top of this FEMA flood layer. And so similar legend, you can See, the darker colors represent a higher amount. And so that dark purple is saying those are populations whose income is below the federal poverty level. So greater than 26% of the population in these neighborhoods or those tracts is below the federal poverty level. And I can go back to my list of layers. And now if I want to hide that poverty layer, I could then see the flooding layer. So now these are the two layers I want to use for my map. So I've got step 1 and step 2 done. So this is my vector layer, which is point, lines, polygons. Again, data that has attributes tied to it. So I just clicked on the map to open up some of the data tied to this. That's the flood hazard layer. But here is my Orleans Parish, the census tract, and you can see all this data that's tied to that location. So perfect. Now, all I want to do is go ahead and save this map. I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to give it my name. Baldwin, week 1. ArcGIS Online map. Give it a tag. Say week 1. And a summary. So what is the data that's actually in this map? Then you can choose to save it in a folder. You can see I've already created a couple folders for the different weeks. And so these are just folders that you own. It's to help you organize content. I'm going to save it in my week 1 folder, and I'm going to hit save map. So that was step 1 and step 2. We've added our layers. We've saved our map. Now we're going to go back and go into my content and actually create a layer where then we can edit and actually create some information and data. So up here on the top of the ribbon, I can select content. And now what I want to be able to do is actually create a vector data set that I can edit and create data in. And I can do this all directly inside of ArcGIS Online. So I'm going to go up here to new item. It gives me a couple tips. It says you can actually drag PDF files or images. You could take spreadsheets or CSVs, or you could link to other data on the web. So thank you, but I don't want to do those things. What I want to actually do is create what's called a feature layer. So I'm going to select that first option. And here I have some additional options. I could use a blank layer. I could use an existing feature layer. So basically copy the structure of one, use a template. So there are a number of kind of predefined templates that Esri has, which are great to be able to use. In this case, though, I'm just going to start with a blank one. So let's select blank, and then I'm going to hit next. Now we give the layer a name. I'm going to be capturing flooding status for the areas in New Orleans that we have that the raster image on. And I'm going to basically want to create some polygons of those areas that are of high flooding. So instead of a point, I want to have a polygon. And again, this is a vector data set, so points, lines, polygons. Or you can actually build just a table too. So I'm going to do a polygon. And do I want GPS data? Do I want Z values? This would be, do I want it to be 3D? And in this case, I don't for this layer. It's just going to be a basic 2-dimensional polygon doing an outline of those flooded areas. And I'll hit next. So flooding status, similar to our map, I can give it some tags to let me find it easier if I have a lot of content. And then I'm going to give it a summary. Flooding status for New Orleans from FEMA data, and save it. So after my layer is created, it gives me a little dialog to help me see how I can finish setting up this layer. So I could add different fields and I could have different settings. So this top ribbon here is what is guiding me through just all of the options for this layer I just created, this flooding status. And so what we're going to do is we're going to modify the data. What are the different fields that we want to have in this data set? Right now, there's just an object ID, which will be a number that'll just grow as we add in different features or rows. And I could also add in photos or files. Could add attachments to this as I add new records. But beyond the object ID or photos and files, I don't have any options. So we want to add in some additional fields. So I can click the Fields button there. And now I can click Add. So the first one I want to do is one just called Flood Status to capture the values that are in that FEMA data. And you can see in the field name, I actually have an undercarriage there because you can't have spaces in the name of the field. And there's also some reserved names of fields you'll find, like type and a couple others. And so if one doesn't work for you, then you might have to try something else. And I also want to capture this as an integer. So the data can get captured in a number of different formats. And this will be similar for people that have done programming or database work. So you can set up the fields to be a date, a double, which would mean it would have decimal places, an integer, so no decimal places, just a round number, or a string, which is basically also text. So in this case, I want to do an integer. Do I want to have a default value whenever something gets created? In this case, no. And I'll allow null values, which means I'll allow values to be blank when this gets created. I'll add my field. And so down here in the attributes or the fields that are available, you can see I have my new one added in here, flood status. I also have the object ID, the shape area, the length, and that photos and files. And let's add in one other one. I'm just going to call this one city. So this will be the location where I'm capturing this data. So for me in this case, kind of a silly thing to capture, but if you're doing a larger area or if you want to capture some other kind of text field, this will be a good example. How long do I want that field to be? Is there a default value I want? In this case, sure. I'll put in default value of New Orleans. And I'm going to add that field. Then the next thing I want to do is with this flood status, I don't want people to be able to just enter in any kind of value. I want it to be either that's not a high flood area, it is either 1% chance of flooding, or it was that kind of medium purple color. So how can we lock down the field to only be able to store that kind of information? And it's really easy to do, and this is really powerful for GIS. And this is called a domain, or in ArcGIS Online, it's called creating a list. And so here I want to hit this create a list button. And I'm in the flood status, and I could do this for any of my other fields if I wanted to. You can see I'm toggling between city and flood status. So in flood status, I want to create a list of values that someone could pick from. So here in my displayed value, I want it to be no flooding. And I'm going to store a 0 because again, this was an integer. So I'm saying in the database level, it's just storing that number, but it's actually relating this value to it. For my other code, I'm going to have a 1, and this is going to be our 1% flood. And we'll do one more, and this will be our 0.2% flood. And after I add in those fields or add in those domains, I'm going to hit save. And so now I've got my new feature layer created, flooding status, and it has 2 new fields in it, flood status and city. And I also have a field or a domain in here, so I can pick from a couple of these values. So now my new layer is all set up and ready to edit or create data inside of. So I just need to go back to the original map that I saved and now add this layer into it. And this one I called flooding status. So let's go back to the map and add that in. So I clicked in my content, and I'm going to actually move this flooding status layer to my week 1 folder. And hit save. And here you can see I've got all my folders. If you want to create a new one, there's that little option there. I'm going to click week 1, and I'm going to go open the map that I just created just now. You can see I can open this in the map viewer or classic. So open it up in just the map viewer, not the classic. Okay, I've got my map loaded back up, and now we want to add in that new layer we just created. So I'm going to go here and just hit add layer. And you can see it defaults to my content, which is fine now because we actually have that flooding status layer we want to add in. So I'm going to add that and click this plus sign. And then after that layer gets added in, I'm going to go back and just view my full layer list. So this flooding status, I can click these 3 little options here, and I can see the table, I can see the properties, and let's look at the table of this. So right now I have those new fields I added in, flood status, city, the attachments, but there's no data in here because we've only built out the schema or the structure of that data, but we haven't added in or edited any information to put in here yet. So that's going to be the next step. So I'm going to close that table, and with flood status selected, you can see it's got the blue line there, so this is the selected layer. I'm now going to go ahead and edit some information. So in my case, what I wanted to be able to do a little bit easier is compare these high poverty areas to some of the places in the city that are most prone to flooding or also least prone to flooding. But right now, it's a little bit difficult to show that story to anyone because I can't really toggle this back and forth to make that comparison. And this is just a basic visual comparison I want to make. So for my purposes, just a rough sketch or outline of those high flood-prone areas, and the least likely areas to flood will suffice and work just fine. So I'm going to select that flood status layer again. And I'm going to come over here to the far right-hand side, and there's a little pencil icon. And if you're on a small screen or if you're on a small laptop, just make sure that you scroll down. It'll have it kind of hidden down at the bottom. So I'm going to click the edit icon. Now I'm going to add a feature. You could also edit features. So I'm just going to click on the map and build out this one area of high flooding. And if I double click, it would then finish the feature. So I'm slowly just clicking around this area of dark purple and double click. You can see here it entered in that city of New Orleans because I said I wanted that to be the default value. And then I get my drop down. So this data will be really, really clean. And this is an area that was the 1% flooding. So I'm going to select that 1% flood status and I'll hit add. Now let's sketch in a couple other locations. So here's another neighborhood that has a high potential for flooding. And I know there's a location in there that looks like it is kind of high ground. And apologies, we will just circle it anyway. So this was one of those 1% flood areas for the most part. Again, city, New Orleans, hit add. Then I want to get one other area of the city here. And in this case, I want to get a location that is those areas that are least likely to flood. See, I'm kind of going along, just clicking, and I'll finish it off there. Kind of this U-shaped space, and this was the no flood or minimal flood area of the city. And again, in New Orleans, and I'll hit add. So for this case, I'm just going to add in those couple of features, but you can add in as many features as you want to tell the story that you're trying to with this initial presentation, with this initial lab. In this case, I'm just doing these 3 as an example, but you can add in additional features. So lastly, we have those features digitized, but I now want to change the symbology or how these features look. How are they being visualized or displayed in the map? So I do that by clicking up here for my styles, and I want to use one of the fields to symbolize my data. We created that city field, we created the flood status. So for this map, I want to use that flood status field. I want to have those different features with different flood status have a different way to display. So I'll click flood status and hit add. I'm going to select this top option. It's going to use different types, unique symbols. And you can see it's already set up a certain way for me to visualize this. It's saying, do you want it to be red for 1%, blue for no flooding, and green for 0.2%? And it already put that into the map for me to see. So the one thing I actually wanted to do to change this is to modify these symbols individually. So I want to turn the fill off because I just want an outline so I can see these a little bit more clearly. So for the 1% flooding, I'll have that be a red outline, and I'll let that be, let's make it pretty thick so we can see it. About a 5-pixel stroke. And our transparency, we want it to be a lot more visible. And then I will do the same thing with the no flooding, because that was that other area that we created. So I'll say no fill, but I want an outline that is not transparent. And let's make this one kind of this orangey color. And we'll do the stroke of a 5. And I'm going to hit done. And done. And now we get those to update. So I can see my 1% flooding areas highlighted in red, and that no chance of flooding there highlighted in that orangey yellow. So then the last step of what I wanted to create for this ArcGIS Online map is let me actually turn off, or I'll turn on the poverty data. And now I have the ability to compare those areas of high flooding. You can see those areas in red right there circled, or this area in red, along with the poverty. And so this isn't a perfect one-to-one, but there is a strong relationship between those areas that are more likely to flood, see here in red, with the poverty indice. And same here, this area of the city that is less likely to flood, but has more affluence, except for a couple of these different census tracts here, which would be really interesting to dive into and see what kind of story is going on in those locations. So my last step of this map is coming over here to save it. And then I come down to this icon to then share the map. So please make sure that you share the map, and not here with owner, organization, or the public, but I want you to come down here and share it with one of the groups that we have set up. So I'll click Edit Group Sharing, and I'll share it into our class group, which you'll all be members of. So just select that and hit OK. And save. And so now I'm finished. So what we did was we logged into ArcGIS Online. We looked for data, in this case, a vector layer, a raster layer. I created a new feature layer and then also edited it. And we then saved that and shared the map with our class group. So that was finishing up task 1 in this first lab.